Hey everyone, welcome to Armbars Sidebars. Today we are joined by one of the most athletic wrestlers in the industry today. She has competed for the National Wrestling Alliance, IMPACT Wrestling, CMLL, Chikara, Game Changer Wrestling. She's even appeared for All Elite Wrestling, WWE, and a plethora of other companies. She's seemingly been taking the wrestling world by storm lately. Lady Frost, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. It was quite the introduction. I appreciate it.
It's really crazy, and we'll get into it because you really haven't been wrestling that long, and you've done so much. It's kind of insane.
Thank you. You left Ring of Honor out. That was the one company.
Oh, I'm slacking.
That's
I'm
all right.
slacking.
Now that you listed them like that, yeah, there were a lot of high profile companies. Yeah.
It's super impressive. So what I like to do is I like to hit the plugs in the beginning and then again at the end, just so everyone can always hear where you're at. So where can people check you out?
At Real Lady Frost.
Real Lady Frost across the board. That's Twitter, Instagram, everything else.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So when I was doing some research, because I'm a fan of yours, I've seen you in Impact, I've seen you in the NWA and just various places like that. One thing I had no idea about was that your grandfather was in wrestling. This completely was not something I knew at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a surprise to a lot of people. He wasn't a huge name, but he tagged with Bruno Sammartino for a while.
He was Batman, right?
So that's probably the most. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he went by I think a few other names as well. Yeah, in the Northern Territories for a while. He was NWA champion for a while. So yeah, I come from a little bit of wrestling history.
Yeah, I thought that was super cool to find out because, the generally where we like to start is, the whole, were you a fan growing up? What was your first exposure? But you must have been exposed to it quite early on.
I mean, yes and no. I didn't go to any independent shows. At that time, it was still very hush hush. Like, you didn't talk about it. He was very secretive. He lived in Florida and I lived up here in Pittsburgh. So, again, there wasn't much crossover. So it wasn't really talked about. And then he was retired by the time I got a little bit older to understand. But I did watch here and there. Like, of course, everyone knew who Stone Cold and The Rock and everyone was, but
was he the type to like kayfabe from family and stuff like that?
Oh yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So if you were only, if you were only casually aware of it, what made you decide to actually get involved in wrestling? When was that jump?
So I met my husband at a fitness convention and we started dating and he just finished training. He was a mixed martial artist and he crossed over and he said, will you come to this show? And it was in like Podunk, West Virginia. It was freaking, a West Virginia indie show. And I was like, what the hell am I doing here? But I say this all the time because it's the truth. A little girl came up to his merch table, which I was working, and she asked me for my autograph with those big beady eyes. And that was it. Like, I was sold. That was, one of the moments for me. But we went to a house show in Pittsburgh and I was just like, I can do this. Like, I watched the women and it's insane now to think about me saying this 5 years ago, but I saw Charlotte Flair make her entrance and she was still doing like the front walkover split entrance. And I was like, oh yeah, I got that. Like, I can totally do this. Just watching one of the best in the world. Like, yeah. So I started training just a little to be his manager, actually. I didn't full out start training to be a wrestler until sometime after managing and kind of feeling out the in-between process, like what it was to be on that side of the ring, what it was like to be a fan, what it was like, to hear the audience behind me. Like, there was so much that I had learned all at once. So I'm glad that I had that experience first before I just went out right to be a wrestler, because I learned so much in that time, just being ringside with him. So that, I think that helped me tremendously.
That's super interesting because, you weren't like a lot of people we've talked to so far on the channel, Sal Renaro, Johnny Yuma, these are people who they've been like, they were super fans long before getting involved in wrestling.
Yeah.
They spent, they were fans at 8 years old, rooting on, either Hulk Hogan or Stone Cold or whatever their age bracket is. So for you to not necessarily be a super fan until right around when you got into it, I find that very interesting, especially because of how quickly you got into it. You talked about Charlotte Flair, and as far as I know, your first match happened to be with WWE. How did that come about? Because that's insane.
Yeah. So I have my husband to thank for that as well. He
Shout out to Victor Benjamin.
Yeah. Real savage gent on social media, but he was doing an extra loop. He had, sent in his information, was accepted. And he said, just fill out the recruit page and fill this or email this guy. And I was like, okay. And it was John Cone at the time. So I don't think he's doing this, so his email won't blow up. Hi, John. So I was like, I'm not sending this in. Like, I'm not a wrestler. I was only managing, and I had like 3 months of wrestling training. So I was like, I'm not sending this stuff in. And he's like, just do it. You can come with me. So of course I did it because he told me to. And it was a Pittsburgh and Cleveland loop, Monday, Tuesday. And I don't know if they just like didn't have a lot of females or like what the deal was. I didn't even have wrestling gear. I didn't have wrestling shoes. I had like Nikes on. I had a managing like one piece, and I always had like a lace duster on over it. So like it was a really high cut gimmick, and because I always had like the duster over it. And they pulled me out for this spot. And they told me like I couldn't wear what I had on because, my butt was hanging out. So I had to wear someone else's underwear. That's a real story. Thanks, Danny Moe, for that.
Fantastic.
Yep. And then they said, hey, you're going to have a promo, but don't worry. You can do it a few times if you need. It's going to be pre-taped. And I said, okay. So they gave me this sheet of paper. And I think it was like an intern or something. And he came back in like 3 to 4 minutes. And he was like, did you look over that, that promo I gave you? And I said, yeah. And he's like, well, where's the paper? And I was like, in my locker room. He said, did you memorize it? And I said, yeah. And he was like, can I hear it? And so I delivered it. He was like, what? 1 second, I'll be back. So he left. I don't know who he spoke to. I did not know the promo was going to be live on television then. So that was a shock. But yeah, the first match was against Asuka. Like I said, I wasn't a trained wrestler. I didn't have shoes. I didn't have gear. Like I had nothing. They were just like, go ahead. So I think at the time I was really like the only person ever that had debuted on television for their very first match ever, unless it was like Ronda Rousey or some celebrity, right? Yeah. Which was wild. Like AEW gives wrestlers that opportunity now. I know it's like a YouTube show. It might be different, or maybe they get a match on Dynamite. I'm not sure. But back then it was like a really big deal. So Twitter was going crazy. I didn't even know how to use Twitter, but yeah, it was a pretty cool moment.
It's truly insane in the best way, especially, now knowing where you've come in that time. So how much you've evolved since then. How was it working with Asuka? Were you aware of how good she was at the time? Because obviously you knew she was a top act and everything, but you were still, I think at that point, how long were you really a fan? Like maybe a year?
Yeah, not even. But of course, I knew this was during her big push, Road to WrestleMania. She had been undefeated at the time. So yeah, I knew the magnitude of it. And she was fantastic. She was absolutely great.
Yeah, I've always seen nothing but positive just feedback about her. And, she just seems incredible. So it was super cool that you did that. And at this point, you said you had maybe 3 months training. Were you just training with Victor, or were you training at like a specific school?
At the time, I was with, I did some manager training at IWC, and then I went to Rise Pro Wrestling, where I finished my tenure. That's where I was for those couple months, out in Uniontown. Yeah, they're still out there. But yeah, I didn't even know how to I didn't know what the international was. I didn't know how to lock up. Like I really didn't. Like I couldn't run spots or anything. Like I was very, very basic. I should not have debuted as fast as I did after that, even on the indies. The WWE match was in March, and then I debuted in June as an indie wrestler in 2018. So I still am about 4.5 years in. Like
That's
March
crazy.
technically will be 5 years. June technically will be 5 years. Yeah, so and a year and a half of those were pandemic years. So that I think people kind of forget that. Like we like to block that point of time out, like that doesn't exist, but that happened.
I'm glad you brought that up because, and I'm skipping around with the notes. I hope you don't mind.
Oh, fine.
The pandemic is so interesting to me because obviously unbelievably tragic for a number of reasons, but it had a big impact on professional wrestling too. And kind of what you said, a lot of people are kind of pushing away. I feel like it's not something a lot of people are talking about because obviously to an extent we're still in it, but not like the lockdowns and everything like it was then. So I think it's very interesting to hear people's mindsets during that time and what kind of struggles they were going for. And because I feel like a lot of people aren't talking about it because it was so heavy, but I'm so curious, what was it like for you being relatively new and then boom, you're getting momentum and then lockdown happens?
So we had just sold our house and moved to Baltimore for Ring of Honor, and we were training at the dojo there. And then we were driving still on our off days about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes to Chikara to train there. I absolutely loved this style, and it was more character based and lucha driven. So, you had Jonathan Gresham at the Ring of Honor dojo, like mat based fundamentals. And then we were driving out to Chikara and training there. And then they were having some sort of agreement with WWE with their catalog, and their program was going to be purchased and everything moving forward. So we actually moved to Philly and changed our characters. Not a lot of people know this. And we're going to work kind of under that umbrella of WWE Chikara, that relationship. So we had all new gear made, everything, moved out there, signed another lease, and then the world shut down. And it really was a disaster. It was, we had already sold our house in Pittsburgh and moved once for a Ring of Honor, and then we did it again for Chikara and changed our characters. And it was devastating. It was absolutely devastating. I will say that we had the best training of our careers there. We did a lot of tag team work, which was incredible. That's where we got, all of the innovative moves and offense. We had promo work, character work. We did a lot of one-on-one stuff just because, we couldn't have large classes. So just my husband and I would get to go in together. We would COVID test, go in, and just get some work. So we stayed conditioned. So in that aspect, it was really beneficial, but personally, financially, like it was crushing. We then had to move back to Pittsburgh, and then I was like, I think I'm done. Like, I think, maybe I'd like to have a bank account again. Maybe I'd like to be able to settle in and like not move every 5 months. And, wrestling just sucked the life out of me. But that comes. And I was so early on. I think everyone judges. They're like, oh, you had 2 years in, you had 3 years. Like, you think this is a struggle. But like, man, it was tough. Like, everyone went through whatever they had to go through. And like, that doesn't take away how difficult it was for us personally. No matter how long you're in some business, right? Like, life is life. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing one aspect of it.
Especially financial burden, because it doesn't matter what age you are. Financial burden is financial burden. It doesn't.
Right. Yeah. So we were moving our life. We rescued our 2 dogs. We have a rescue cat. So we, had to move everything again, everyone. And, it was good to get home. I think it was nice to be back in Pittsburgh, but it was really, a somber time for wrestling in general. No fans. And then we didn't really have any training up here. So it was just like everything was on hold.
Yeah, and it really was tough. And then we're not going to have to get into this, but then there was the speaking out stuff too. So like there was a lot of time for reflection and self-reflection in the business, a lot of opportunities changing and going away. But it's interesting to me that you said you were rethinking it for a little bit, because I just did an interview with Johnny Yuma, and he went through the same thing where, it was such a struggle to find work at that point, especially safe work. That was a big thing where, you might be able to work with these places, but are they following the protocols? Are they going to be safe for you and the fans and everybody, or if they even had fans?
Right.
So that's so interesting. And you training with Chikara and Ring of Honor is very interesting because, as you pointed out, they're very different. Jonathan Gresham, I mean, he was in Chikara too, but fundamentals and technical, he's amazing. He's incredible at it. And
Yep.
who were you training with for Chikara? Was it just Quack, or was there other trainers there as well?
Yeah, at that time it was mostly just Quack.
Yeah, because like he was so technically proficient as well, but he just the lucha influence is very cool. And you're so athletic. What was your upbringing? Like, were you a gymnast? How did that work?
Yeah, I was a competitive gymnast for 10 years, and I did some diving, and then I went into fitness. I taught dance and fitness for a very long time, so it never really left me.
Did it translate early on for wrestling, or was it something that you kind of incorporated later?
It was definitely very, very an easy transition. I did a little bit of theater in high school as well, but I think as far as I tell people the floor exercise in gymnastics is a square. Your tumbling passes are at a diagonal or straight down the middle. So ring positioning in wrestling, it's kind of the same. Like you don't get in these clunky areas. You work corner to corner or straight down the middle. So footwork and that kind of stuff came pretty naturally. I was fairly light because I had great body control, and that's just core strength and knowing your surroundings, where you're at, upside down, that kind of thing. Like nothing was really scary for me. Like a few things, of course. And then, gymnastics, you're always landing on your feet, and they're like, all right, land on your stomach or your back. I'm like, what? So that was a little weird. But I did go to some trampoline parks just to like feel that motion of landing on my back some more. But it was pretty easy physically. Other than the feeling of like, holy shit, this hurts, or like running the ropes and like my whole back is bruised, like that was not natural. So, but yeah, the crossover was probably pretty easy.
That's interesting. And you brought up how it was difficult to adjust because you're not used to the bumping because you're always rolling and tumbling. And it's kind of like with amateur wrestling where when you're not, your whole thing is to not be on your back. And with
Right.
wrestling, you need to be on your back. So it's just an interesting dynamic there.
Yeah.
So did you have any, I guess the tougher part must have been the psychology behind wrestling, right? Trying to figure that out.
Yeah, it was. But I do think, like I said, being a manager really helped because one, I was a new fan. So I was seeing this stuff like close up for the first time. And my husband's in there, my boyfriend at the time. And I'm like, oh my God, did that hurt? Like I'm freaking out, right? Like, shit. I'm like trying to talk to him, like, are you okay? Are you okay? Like it was very real to me because it's not often you see that in that way. Like an MMA fight is different. He had a pro boxing match, and like that was very different. Just because you're no selling everything in those sports. You cannot let your opponent know that you're hurt, that you're winded, that you're anything. So you're always acting like very, very tough in those instances. So then you see wrestling, and then you see someone selling, and you're like, holy shit! Like I don't know if that's real or not. So it did draw me in that sense, and then figuring out what the story was, that was very much my area that I had something to offer. I think the two of us as a pair, because that storytelling is a little different than just a singles match, right? And then the communication on the outside of the ring. I think having a manager is so beneficial sometimes because you get to run things through someone. It's just like a very good ref. You get to use them as a benefit and addition to your match. So and then working at Chikara as well, like that, the psychology there was broken down a whole lot more than just fundamental wrestling per se. I think details were very important to me. I just didn't want to be like an athlete, like, oh, that girl does flippy stuff, right? Like I wanted to be able to pay attention to small things in the match. I asked a whole lot of questions. We traveled a ton. I wanted to get outside influence from just people that had been different places and trained in a different style and had a different perspective, because I wanted all of them. I was like, give me all of the knowledge and then I'll decide what I want to use and take forward.
That's such a good attitude that you want, because it's easy to train, one way with
Yeah.
one person. And look, a lot of people are successful that way, so I'm certainly not casting any stones that way. But to get these different perspectives and be able to mix them in your game, and even if
Yeah.
it's not something you necessarily use for yourself, it's good to learn, okay, if this person works this way and I find someone else who works this way, now I know how to adapt to their style and what they like to do.
Right. You have more to offer your opponent, the match, the fans. No one really wants to watch me grapple, but that doesn't mean that I can't, that I don't have that in there. Most people want to see me go to the top rope or do something athletic because that's my wheelhouse. That's what I feel comfortable doing. And that's kind of where I've marketed my moveset, right? The character. So, but it's good to train everything. Like my husband was, a mixed martial artist, and then he was doing lucha and doing like flippy things. And he was like, oh my God, this is great. Like he didn't want to do that. He wasn't really like, yeah, sure, I want to train lucha, but he did. And, that's just another layer. Like you said, if you're wrestling someone in that style, you're not a fish out of water.
Yeah, it makes everybody better, and I think that's a great attitude to have, and
Yeah.
probably a big reason why you've been so successful.
Well, thank you.
So when you were in Chikara, and by the way, there's a little habit of mine. I keep trying to break it, but I bring it up every video anyway. My transitions are always so. but but when you worked there, One Eye Jack and the Red Queen were your names, right? Could you talk about what the gimmick really was?
So we didn't get to really like dive into them. They were loosely based on playing cards, to be honest. But when we were doing all of this work, we were filming studio tapings with no audience before anyone was doing this because we were still trying to send this product to WWE. And we were really like the first group of people. It was called Action Arcade at the time. And it was really interesting because, getting into a new character without an audience, without a story, different wrestlers were either sick or didn't want to participate, those sort of things. Like we couldn't get into what the characters were going to be and what their feud was, what their obstacles to overcome, or any of that stuff. But they were honestly based on playing cards. So that's really all I can give you.
That's so cool, though. For someone who might not be familiar with Chikara is very over the top characters and very over the top storylines. So it fits in with the theme of the company. And you really wonder what could have been with, those shows had they been on the internet, because they have to exist somewhere. And obviously things with Chikara and WWE didn't end up working out, pandemic, everything else, but it'd be interesting to see.
I do want to see some of those. I know we had like two. They were more like enhancement style matches. But we carried it over into Pretty Proper, our finisher that we came up with then. And that was just like hours of messing around with a crash pad. He's strong and I'm flippy, and we're like, let's make this work. But yeah, it was definitely fun. Like I know he didn't want to wear a mask, and then it was, after you get into characters that aren't you, not that I'm Lady Frost, right? Like I'm not Lady Frost. But you're very much connected to who you become and what you do. So removing all of that and playing just a character, it was almost easier because you didn't have any emotional attachment, right? It was brand new, and it was just like, I'm acting, like I'm straight out acting at this point. And like he loved it. I loved it. I thought it was it was a very different feel because, like I said, we weren't really like emotionally invested at the time into that. Like I'm sure we could have been. We did, start to love it. And I think the dynamic between the two of us was really cool, and the characters. So it was going to translate. It did translate, I think, but we didn't have enough time to be like really, really upset that, those characters don't exist anymore. I mean, they're in the closet. They do exist, but
No, I can understand the detachment there because you are doing something different. And I think that's another kind of cool thing that Chikara had in general. Like if you start off with a mask and you're not going out and it's a little different because you didn't have a mask, but with a different character, you're not you. So you have more room to experiment too, I would feel like.
Yes, exactly.
Another thing that you do a lot of is obviously, and you just brought it up, mixed tag team matches.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious about the independent scene. They have a lot of that intergender and everything, but I'm sure there's still some people, who were either difficult about it or weren't necessarily into it. And you don't need to name names, but did you ever find any difficulty with anybody who maybe didn't want to interact with you in that way or didn't want to work with you or had issues putting over stuff?
Honestly, no, because I think at the time, it was gaining a lot of traction, and anyone that was booking it wanted to have that, and the fans knew what to expect. We had, Bear Country. I forget what they're going by now. I think Savages are in their name actually, but they're now with AEW. But we wrestled them at Beyond, and like you would think these two like big beefy men were gonna be like, hell no, I'm not doing shit for this girl. But they were fantastic. They were like some of our favorite people to work, just because it's wrestling, it's a show. Everyone gets it. You know what I mean? If you can suspend someone's disbelief for just a little bit, it's not like I was standing there like beating the crap out of both of them, right? Like you tell a story and whatever, they were great. We didn't meet a whole lot of resistance, and we haven't tagged in a long time just because I think once I signed with Impact and I was there, I was very busy and people were booking me just as a single solo act. And then he kind of went a different direction as well. And I think like we had to grow as individuals. We were so almost reliant on each other, even just like managing each other or doing mixed tags, that when we were alone, we're like, oh my God, my security blanket is gone. Like, where's my person? Like, I'm not a complete act. Your mannerisms are different. The way that you look, you yearn for someone, those things, it was like learning all over again. And now we do have one mixed tag coming up, and I'm like, what do we do as a tag? Like, we're gonna have to go back and watch our stuff and like actually train together again. But luckily, like, we work well together, so it's not like it's difficult or we don't want to do it. But yeah, we had a nice little run, and then we parted ways for a little, did our singles thing, and now hopefully we can start bringing that back again.
Sounds like a great learning opportunity. And the places where you were doing, you mentioned Beyond Wrestling, obviously Chikara. These are places that have a lot of intergender wrestling in general too. And like you said, the audience, they know what they're getting. They're into it. So it seemed like it was the perfect place to introduce this kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Overall, what would you say your experiences were with Ring of Honor? Because obviously they've had, they were one of the few companies during the pandemic who were still giving a lot of work. They weren't cutting people. They weren't, or at least for the most part. And obviously, unfortunately, they shut down, but then Tony Khan bought it. And I guess they're going to be back running with the show weekly soon. How was your experiences with them overall?
I think there's positives and negatives everywhere. We weren't working with them through the pandemic, so I can't really speak to, how that was handled. I think, one or two people in a company doesn't make it a bad company. If, you don't see eye to eye, or someone like really, really great doesn't make or break a company either. I think, we spent a lot of time doing ring crew there, setting up the rings for everyone. So it was okay. It wasn't,
not what you hoped.
Correct.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, we were still very green, and I think, we were like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, like we're selling our house and we're going to Ring of Honor and we're gonna be on TV, like that kind of thing. And yeah, we did a lot of ring crew and got humbled real fast. And we always dream big, right? If we go somewhere thinking like, I only deserve to set up the ring, well, then that's all you're going to do, right? Yeah. I'm not apologetic anymore about wanting what I want and wanting a place where I feel I want or deserve to be. So I deserve to be setting up the ring, yes, and now I don't. So I mean, I will set up the ring. I just mean, main roster is still on the goal list for me somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's the famous quote, and I'm paraphrasing it, by Kevin Nash, where everybody calls it the wrestling business until you treat it like one. And that at a certain point, when you're green and experienced, and even when you are experienced, if they need help with a certain thing, but you still need to be able to advance your own career, especially when it's your livelihood.
Right. And there's always room to learn and to grow and to listen and, be in a place where you're not the best in the room. You're not the smartest in the room ever. I realize that I'm, a few years in, but, if you don't set your sights high, then I don't know. That's just, I think both of our mentalities, like we want what we want. We don't like to settle. But we're willing to put in the work, right, to get there. It's not like we want anything handed to us or think we deserve, just an easy fast track somewhere. I think everyone has a different journey in the business, and I think timing is a big thing. And who knows? Like life can change in an instance, just like the quarantine, COVID, and everything, and new companies forming, companies crashing down. Like you never know.
Yeah, wrestling's crazy for that. I mean, not going to get into it, but all the headlines going on with wrestling to this very day when we're recording right now, it's
Yeah.
you just don't know what to think, and that's part of the journey.
Yeah, you have to take care of yourself. I learned that early on. Like I was a people pleaser, and I wanted the best for everyone else but me, right? And you give and you give and you give, and then you get sucked dry and you have nothing left to give, and then you have nothing left for yourself. So I try to make sure that we are happy and healthy at home so that every other aspect, can thrive from that. But you have to be good inside to be able to give anything away.
Yeah, I mean, you can only look after everybody else so much without looking after yourself too.
Yeah, for sure.
In the pandemic, you did a few matches with the Ring of Honor. I think they were on AEW Dark. You did a tag match with, was it Genocide? Was your partner? And then you had a match with Red Velvet.
Yeah.
How did those opportunities come about?
How did that start? I want to say it was probably Kevin Matthews, who owns Wrestle Pro. He had seen me at a Monster Factory show in New Jersey and was like, you, and just like believed in me from the start, watched me, would watch some of my matches, give me feedback. He contacted someone and said, hey, email this person and try to get yourself some TV time or some work, some extra work. So that's how that door was opened. And then, I spent a little time there doing those matches, and it was fun. It was a different time. Again, there was no crowd. We had the whole roster out and the extras like trying to cheer and boo from, the empty stadium. But
this is at Daly's place?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was definitely, it was interesting. I'd met Red Velvet at Ring of Honor, actually. So her and I were like trying to have a banger. We were trying to go. And back then they did allow, more, I don't want to say evenly matched matches, but it's not quite like it is now. I had an entrance and everything. So it was fun. It was a good experience.
Who were your coaches for the matches? Do you remember?
Dustin.
Yeah. Oh, that must have been a great opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, he's so talented.
Yeah, he was incredible. We did training before the tapings, and he was just like, I wanted to stay there. Like, can I train with you forever, ever? But back then, like, they were taping after the shows, and I'll never forget, I think it was Velvet and our match went on at like 2:30 in the morning that night.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, people don't know that part about, some of these tapings, or at least back then. I don't know how late they go now, but yeah, it was like 2:33 in the morning when we were wrestling. So you're like in makeup all day. It was kind of chilly out at the time. So yeah, it was interesting.
I guess in that one scenario, it's the only positive of not having fans there, because can't even imagine how tired they would have been. Totally exhausted.
I mean, any fans are better than no fans, because they're gonna cheer, they're gonna boo. Like when it's completely quiet, like the extras and the workers were exhausted. They don't want to cheer for 8 hours.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so it was a very like, I don't want to say deflated feeling, but it wasn't like you're getting fired up and like the energy's there. You have people behind you. You're going to get things over because people know you. It was just like, yay, boo. But, you know, that footage is out there forever. And I'm sure it helped me in the long run. Like a lot of good things started coming after those matches. So I'm really, really grateful for those opportunities there.
Oh yeah, that's great exposure. And you know, we talked about the pandemic stuff earlier, but one thing we didn't really talk about at first, you know, no fans, and then later a little bit of fans. Was it difficult with things like spot calling and talking to people in the ring? Because now the you had the camera on, you didn't have the sound of all the audience drowning it out, or you had very few fans there to drown it out.
Yeah, I mean, in that instance, you know, you're only doing like 5 to 7 minute matches, so there's not a lot of communicating really. It's just like go in there, you get your shit done, and go home.
I mean, just in general during that time, not just for the AEW matches, but
Oh yeah. I mean, especially like if you're a baby face and you're trying to rip your comeback and get fired up like for real, and there's no one there behind you, you're like, man, like I could really use an audience. You
oh,
get it because that's where it comes from. You get that energy and that, you know, deep within it comes from the fans a lot of times, and you don't realize that unless you are a baby face or you've only been wrestling so long that that's all that you know. And then when that's taken away, you really understand like we need these people. Like this is why we do this. Like there are so many days where I was like, holy cow, I realize how much I do this for the audience. I don't do it for me. Like it's not getting my rocks off. Like I want to entertain people.
mhm.
So it was definitely a challenge at first. It was like you had to shift your mindset a lot.
Did you change your style a little bit during that time too? Because again, you're talking about how you can't do the same firing up, or you can, but it's not going to give you the same feeling. So did you have to shift things like that, or did you kind of just go
I
with it?
think
And
I worked predominantly as a heel actually,
okay,
and so it was I didn't really have to fire up and be a baby face. That was a challenge when I started with Impact, actually. They're like, you're a baby face. And I was like, what? But I was like, I don't know what to do with my hands. So I did definitely work a lot slower. I think I learned, you know, less is more sometimes. Like people know I'm athletic, but that doesn't mean that I have to give them 87 athletic things. Like we keep it special, we keep it meaningful. And that's part of learning storytelling over, you know, everything else. Like I see a whole lot of athletes wrestling now, a lot of gymnasts, which is cool, right? Like I wasn't the first gymnast ever, but um, I think it's very important to emote and to give an experience, not just like, hey, watch me do a choreographed gymnastics routine. Like I already did that in life. You know, I could put out YouTube videos for that. Like I want to affect humans. I
mhm.
want to make connections. And yeah, I want to be an athlete too. But yeah, I slowed down. I did a lot less, but it was definitely harder to do more athletic things without an audience, to be honest.
I guess that kind of makes sense too, though, where you know when there's an audience, maybe you might fall into bad habits of wanting that, you know, quote unquote cheap pop of, you know, doing something athletic and getting that immediate response. While
Yeah,
without the fans there, you have more reason to think of the story and not just trying to get the instant gratification.
yeah, for sure.
That's very cool. I want to talk a little bit about the National Wrestling Alliance because I
Mhm.
know you started working with them, and that was some of the early time when I really started watching your work. And how did you get in touch with the NWA? Who was your in for it? How did that work out?
Um, I want to say Mickey James was the catalyst for that. Um, man, I get kicked in the head a lot, so my memory is. Oh, I believe I had done something with Impact, and that's where she had seen me. Um, and then she was doing the NWA Empower pay per view. I think. Don't quote me on that, but um, maybe no, that wasn't it. So it was Pat Kenny. He did just like contact me out of nowhere, and I don't know if someone was injured or I was on his list. I remember he said he had a whiteboard and I was on the short list, and I was like, all right, cool. But then he, you know, that was it. Like I showed up for extra work, I think, before the NWA Empower pay per view. Yeah. So I got a call from one of the talent agents.
What were your experiences like in the NWA? Did you enjoy your time there while you were there?
I did. I really enjoyed the NWA actually. I think they treated their talent well. I have nothing but good things actually to say about my time there. And it
Yeah.
wasn't, it wasn't long, but Jazz was incredible. Alondra Blaze, Medusa was there. They had really great agents. And, I think it was the first time I had ever seen a full television style product come together from top to bottom with, you know, this is what we're going to do today. This is what I want. This is, it was very detailed. And I love that. I love direction. I want a vision. I love seeing someone else's vision and how I can help create that and be an asset to that product. So in that sense, I felt like I did have a place there. But yeah, like I enjoyed it very much.
And there was a great group of talent around you where, people, I have a list of some of the people you had matches with there. Kylie Ray, we know
Yep.
that for all we know, she might be WWE bound. I'm not sure the situation there, but she just was on main event, which is awesome. Sky Blue, who's in AEW now. Kenzie Page, who has really evolved and upped her game in the NWA. Allison Kay, and she's a veteran at this point.
Yep.
What did you have any standout matches in particular that you like the most from your time there, or you remember the most?
Um,
I know you're on the spot.
no. I think I enjoyed my match with Kenzie, actually. That was like one of my first two. I had one with Genocide, one with Kenzie, and I think they were still feeling me out, right? Like I wasn't getting a lot. It was just like, let's see what this girl does. It was a closed set at the time. You have like 30, 40 people in the audience. Um, and like anywhere, you have to prove yourself. So I wasn't really given a whole lot. I think they were trying to get a gauge on like, was I baby? Was I heel? How did I interact? Like those kind of things. But Kenzie was a great worker. I think, given some time and some build up, we would have had a great little something going on there. Kylie was fantastic. I'd worked her a few times. I wish we got into something. Serena Deeb she was like just on the way out. I was really hoping we were going to mix it up. But yeah, they had a lot of talent right then at the time. So I think a lot of potential matches could have been put pretty great. And now, with more time under my belt, TV experience, that I think I would have had a more clear direction. But I was just establishing myself, right? I was only a couple years in, and I was also figuring out who I was.
Yeah, and who knows? Never say never. You could always end up back there in the future. Even though you're quite busy these days.
A little bit.
Before we transition to Impact and CMLL, because I definitely want to talk about both before I let you go, and thank you for being so generous with your time.
Absolutely.
One thing that stood out to me immediately when I first saw you is you dressed and you acted and you had an entrance of a star. And I'm not saying that just because you're here, I promise. But there's a certain thing where some people can pull off just coming out without a big over the top entrance or an over the top look, and it works for them. And then some people it just doesn't really work for. For you, you had a certain personality, and there was something just grabbed people's attention as soon as you walked out. How important to you was getting, good gear, a standout look, because again, you look different than everybody else.
It was very, very important to me. I remember kind of what I gravitated towards, even being a newer fan, is appeal, is entrance. What do you feel as soon as someone hits that curtain? Are you, what do you invoke in someone? Do I understand your character? Do I want to know more? Those kind of things was very important to me because, again, I did want to be just more than a gymnast in a wrestling ring.
Mm-hmm.
It was very important to me that the character was portrayed a certain way. And, in the beginning, it wasn't really what I wanted. I think it was easy for people to sink their teeth into. Like Frozen was a whole big thing. And like, I just kept getting pegged in that like Elsa box. But, it was relatable. It was something that helped me lean into that until I got better at wrestling. But I was always forward focus on that. Good gear was very, very important. I wanted to dress for the job that I wanted. I wanted to look like a professional, and I wanted to be a TV product. I always had that in mind. I didn't go into this thinking I want to be an indie wrestler, right? Like,
Yeah.
And some people do, and that's okay, right? Like some people make a great living, and you can, but I think I wanted to look television product.
And that makes sense where your first real exposure, I mean, you were exposed to it for years, but your first real exposure, Charlotte Flair. You look at her and she has this big entrance and she comes across like a star. So it makes sense that in your own way, not really emulate it, but a similar vibe.
I mean, my first experience wrestling was on television, so
Yeah.
It's hard to step down from that and to unfeel that and to unknow that and not shoot for that again and again and again. I think, maybe people expect everyone to start at the bottom and stay at the bottom and work their way up for X amount of years. But when you are exposed to something, like that's what you want, and you want it over and over. Like I want 15,000 people in the audience for every match, right? Like when you go to that and then you go to wrestling in front of 30 people, like it is humbling, but I'm not working to only work for 30 people for 10, 15 years. Like that's not the goal. So anything that I could do to up my value for any product, for those 30 people, that promoter or a television product, like that's what I was prepared for.
Oh, that's smart. And you mentioned you kind of boxed in with the gimmick, and I wasn't planning to ask this, but now I'm curious. Lady Frost, the gimmick, the name, how did that really come about? Because it sounds like that maybe wasn't something you wanted.
WWE named me Jamie Frost, and my husband and I were getting into the Lady and the Gentleman gimmick, and he called me Lady all the time, and I hated the name Jamie, and then I wasn't really sure if I was allowed to use that name. So that's where I just kept Frost and kept Lady, I guess, from the part of our gimmick. And it really did evolve. It took some time to find out what it meant to me and what I wanted it to be. And it had to come from a deep place. And that's why you've seen like the switch from lighthearted Disney princess villain, whatever, into kind of, what I perceive it to mean to me. Like no one wants to be left in the cold, right? Like the cold sucks. Everyone hates it, but can you survive or can't you? It's a kill or be killed mentality. So I have a lot of personal ties now, I think, that help me kind of emulate what I want and get the proper promos out, stuff like that. And it can be marketed, I think, a lot of different ways. Like when you're on the indies, it's just kind of like, hey, you have this match, this match, this match. You're not telling stories and really getting invested into characters as much. And I find promoters really don't want gimmick. They're like, just go wrestle. And you're like, okay, well, not what I do. Yeah. I have a whole presentation. So a lot of that standing your ground too. Like, this is who I want to be, what I want to do. This is the mark that I want to leave on wrestling when my catalog is out there and people are going back and searching through my stuff. I'm not Elsa in real life. I'm not Elsa as Lady Frost in the wrestling ring. Like that's not what I wanted to be like. So it did take a little figuring out, and it was more putting my foot down rather than like falling into the trap of what people or promoters or kind of where it was taking me at the time.
It became authentic to you, and that's really cool. And a common theme is TV ready, TV presentation. And you did a big thing with TV when you debuted for Impact Wrestling. And I believe right away you were working with Deanna. Can you talk about how you got into Impact and working with Deanna? Because she's incredible. And I'm just curious about your overall experience.
I love Deanna. Hello, if you see this. She's fantastic. She's incredible in the ring. She's easy to work with. Mega talented and very sweet. And I believe that was Mickey and Gail, because they had seen me at the NWA and Power pay-per-view. I came in for just, that particular match, and it was, to do the job. Deanna was the champion, and rightfully so. She was on a tear at the time, but I did what I had to do, to try to be who I could be in that piece of the pie. Right. But Deanna was fantastic. I would wrestle her over and over. A lot of talent in that locker room. A lot of very, very talented women.
For sure. So many. I know, for example, in January, I think it was a few weeks out, it could be longer than that, but you had an Ultimate X match. How was that experience? Because now, of all people, this is fitting for somebody like you, where you're just such a crazy athlete.
Yeah, I had to fight for that a little bit. And I'm pretty sure, like, I mean, I did ask for that before I signed. Like, that was on my bucket list, just being in an Ultimate X match, not the first. I didn't know they were going to do an all women's. Like, I wanted to be the first female in an Ultimate X match. That was on my bucket list. So the timing was right for that. And I'm sure a lot of people that were on the roster for a while were not happy about, like, the new girl, one of my first matches, like, getting a huge pay-per-view history making moment. You know, I get it, but it's my wheelhouse. It's what I wanted. And you know, of course I would have loved to play a bigger part. I think if I were there longer, things would have been a little bit different, but you know, it was one of my very first matches there, and I knew what I wanted to accomplish, and it was moonsaulting off of the structure to some capacity. But that's, like, you know, it's a playground for me. That was like, let me at it. Some people are afraid of heights, and they're like, oh my God, you know, freaking out. But I had no fear when it came to that. Like, that was the excitement, the rush. That's really what I live for when I'm doing something like that.
I'm one of those people. If I'm on the ladder, you'll see the ladder start shaking because my legs are quivering. I don't know why. I can't help it. It's a natural instinct. Maybe if I did it more, I would break the habit. But because it's such a poor experience, I'm like, I'm good. I'll stay on the ground.
Yeah, I definitely have, like, the daredevil in me. I can't say that, like, I'm itching to do a death match or anything, but, like, jumping off balconies and, like, ladder matches or whatever, like, I'm like all for it.
And the talent in that match was incredible. You had Tasha Steeles, Alicia Edwards, Rosemary, Chelsea Green, and Jordan Grace, which is just what a group of women that you were working with at that time.
Yeah, it was a very special crew. Like I said, there was so much talent in that locker room. All the girls were fantastic. Like, it was a pleasure to make history that night with everyone.
Another act that you worked with was The Influence, Tennille Dashwood, aka Emma. She's on SmackDown. Madison Rayne. Both of them have now gone their separate ways from TNA, as well as you. You know, Emma's now in WWE. Madison Rayne's working with AEW. What was it like working with them, and how was that? Because I think that was more of, like, a more regular thing at that point for you, right?
No, we worked them, I believe it was over WrestleMania weekend. But they were great. They were all pros, vets. The Influence, they were so fun. Like, I loved their chemistry together. Like, always entertaining. I remember, fun story, I don't even think I told them this, but when I did extra work after, like, 2018, 2019, I had watched both of them cutting a live promo in one of the rooms that I was in. And they were, like, hilarious. They were hilarious. And just watching them in general, go over things and just kind of, like, be them, it was fantastic. Like, I loved watching those two entertain. So, and I don't even think I got to tell them that when we were at Impact, but yeah, they're fantastic.
That's a cool full circle moment too, to be able to start working with them after, you know, having that experience of, like, not fanning out for them, but yeah, fanning out for them to an extent.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all come from being extras and in the background to being on show with the same people, right? There's a lot of people that I once met being an extra, and now I wrestle them.
That's great. It's great. Before we hit CMLL, and then the plugs, you got injured last year. In my notes, I said this year. My bad. In last year, you had an injury. What happened, and how was that setback?
It wasn't necessarily like a typical injury. But yeah, it was only a couple, maybe 5 weeks. But I think that kind of set into motion some other things with why I wasn't wrestling. But I was back and ready for action quickly. I think just the universe had other plans. So I got a lot of free time. I got a pool in the summer, and that's how I spent most of my days unemployed. Well, technically I was employed.
Yeah, you were employed.
I was employed, just not getting paid. So yeah, I had a lot of pool time. I had a lot of time with the dogs. You could say I was recovering, but, like, I was just living life. So yeah, setbacks in all shapes and sizes happen.
Definitely. And, you know, we don't need to get into that. Your setbacks are publicized. Everyone can look that up if they want, but you've recovered very strongly. And that's where I want to get to. CMLL, how did the opportunity come about? When we were first talking about doing this interview, I want to say it was maybe a month or two ago, right when the channel started, I think you were going there for the first time. And now you've been there a couple times since. So what's the experience like? How did the opportunity come about? And how are you enjoying it?
So the opportunity was a Grand Prix, which was Mexico versus the rest of the world. So they had talent from all over Chile, Japan, America, Puerto Rico, and a talent was asked who they thought would be good to work Japanese wrestlers, and my name was brought up. And I think, they did some research, and that was it. I got the call, and it was an incredible experience. I think, I was very down at the time. If you've seen any of my recent interviews, I talk about I was just in a really bad place. I didn't know if I wanted to continue wrestling. But I wanted to go to Mexico very much. So I was like, maybe I'll just go and then be done after Mexico. But it was refreshing because no one knew who I was really, right? You're a nobody again, and you go out in front of these people and they're forced to make judgment upon you. They have to make a decision if they like you or not, they think you're talented or not. So having really no politics involved, no anything. It was just I'm a foreign person coming into a new territory, and they took to me, which was incredible. You can't fake that. So
Yeah.
I was like, holy cow, this is great. So it was a really, really fun week. They were super hospitable. Everyone was great to work with over there. Got called to come back last trip. My partner and I won the whole tournament, the Bicentennial Cup, which was, I can't even really put into words. I was very, very emotional. I think, it was kind of the first really big deal for me. I'd won championships and stuff before, but it was just this one feels different, right? This is
CMLL, that's huge.
Yes. Yeah. I have the cup. It barely made it back in my suitcase. It's a little, hold please.
Yeah,
hold
absolutely.
on.
Absolutely. We have to see this. Are you kidding me? This has to be on camera.
If you can see, it's not quite round. And it's a little tilted in a certain direction. We did an okay job, but if you can see that.
Yeah, some of the text has a glare on it, but you can get the general idea of it.
Yeah, it's a cup.
Yeah.
It is so a cup cool. That barely made it, but nonetheless, it's home with me. And like I said, it was a really big freaking deal. And it changed, what I felt about myself. You never really want to think our self-worth is based on other people's opinions, but it kind of is. So, there are certain days where you're like, man, I suck. Should I be doing this? I don't know. I've always been that way. So when you're feeling real shitty, and then they're like, hey, you're going to be at the end of this tournament. And, I didn't know really what was going to happen until it happened. And that's crazy. That's it. I don't know. It changes your mind a little bit.
Yeah, when you were in that down place and things didn't quite take the turn you wanted in your career maybe, and you're even thinking about giving up to have this opportunity come. And I believe this was your first international tour. Maybe you did something in Canada. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'd done something in Canada. I'd been to London before as well. Okay. Yeah, I'd wrestled over there in my second year. I think it's 2019. I went over to the UK.
But still, it's a big opportunity.
Yes.
So this leads to the last question. What does the future look like for Lady Frost?
I cannot predict the future. That's sure. But I'm going to keep working and hustling and doing what I do. And I don't know. I want to be happy. I want to inspire, and I want to leave the business better than I found it. I was taught that early on, and I think it's important. I want the new generation coming up. I know I'm still new. I'm not a vet, but I want new wrestlers to feel like they have a safe place or someone to bounce ideas off of, or someone they can come to, right? And learn a little bit. If I have anything to offer, I'm willing to give it. I have more to give in the industry. I'm certainly not done. I want to keep making history.
And that's awesome. Again, the fact that you were almost out, but now you're making such a splash and you're keeping your family name going. You know what I mean? And it's very cool that different generation of the family leading wrestling to the new generation. One more time before we wrap up, where can people find you? Where can people check you out?
Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm at Real Lady Frost. There's an all my links link at the top of any of those pages, and you can find Big Cartel, pro wrestling tees, all of those kind of things. Amazon wish list. I just updated that recently. So all of those fun things at Real Lady Frost across the board.
And we will have that in the description, everybody. We'll have a link to her, all my links. We'll probably have individual links to at least a number of them, Twitter and everything. And then at the end of each video, there's a graphic displaying it. So be sure to check her out. Be sure to check us out at Armbars Sidebar on Twitter, at Armbars and Sidebars on Instagram, and at Armbars and Sidebars on YouTube. Subscribe if you haven't already. We have a bunch of fun interviews coming up, and this was a delight. Thank you so much for spending your time and offering your time to tell your story, because your story is super interesting.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Until next time, guys. Later.